Hi, this is Amanda Teresi with Liberty on the Rocks, and today we're excited to have with us Tim Sandefur. He is an attorney from the Pacific Legal Foundation, a Cato adjunct scholar, and an author of the new book, A Right to Earn a Living. So, welcome, Tim. Thank you so much for being with us
Thanks
today.
for having me.
So, why don't you go ahead and give us a kind of a brief summary of your book, just to kind of provide the information that's in there. So, give viewers a reason to want to go out and purchase it today.
Well, because it's a brilliant and eloquent work of art.
Oops.
No, the focus of the book is on the right of economic choice, the right to make decisions for ourselves about what we buy, what we sell, what jobs we take, how much we're willing to accept in payment for those jobs, and other kinds of free choice that unfortunately are taken away from us every day by legislatures, both at the state and federal level. And unfortunately, especially for the past half century or so, courts have really refused to protect this constitutional right.
Yeah, well, I skimmed through a little bit of the book. Haven't read the whole thing, unfortunately, yet because it's a big book, and I do plan to get a copy. But it seems obvious that whether or not you make a ton of money or whether you just make average middle class income, it doesn't matter. This affects you either way. It seems to affect just the
Absolutely.
entire economy as a
Oh,
whole.
it affects people who earn less much more than it affects those who earn more, because when the government can deprive you of economic opportunity or redistribute wealth or opportunities, that power falls into the hands of people who have the most political influence, who are the wealthy and the well connected. It's the poor, it's members of minority groups who need constitutional and legal protection for economic freedom more than anyone else, because they can't rely on lobbyists to protect their economic interests at the state capitol building. What they need is serious protection for their constitutional right to earn a living.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's important because a lot of times you talk about earning a living or making money in some sense, and people assume it's mostly for the rich that
Oh,
it's going to
I
matter,
know.
but
To
it's
me,
just not
this is
true.
the most disastrous thing in American culture, as politically at least, is the idea that has been accepted by so many people that free markets are something that only evil big business corporations want. It's exactly the opposite. Big business evil corporations hate free markets. They always have, and they've always taken every opportunity to get special favors for themselves, to raid the government treasury, to get bailouts from the government, to use occupational licensing laws and other regulations to protect them against entrepreneurs who just want to enter the market. No, it's entrepreneurs and small businesses that need constitutional protection and free markets the most,
Mm-hmm.
because in a free market, success is determined by whether you satisfy your customers.
Mm-hmm.
But in a politically controlled market, in a market where politicians make the decision, though your success is determined by political success. It's determined by who you know. And that's a competition that small businesses can never win.
Right, or just your average individual. Um, that kind of brings me up to my second point. You briefly discuss, at least in the beginning of the book, and I think you go into it later, the idea that these antitrust laws are actually harmful, or just more over the idea of protectionism in general. However, you see a lot of times that those on the political right and left tend to suggest that we need these kind of laws to protect the consumer. Although I think you make a case in there that it actually is more harmful. So, what would you say to our viewers watching as to why these laws are actually harming society more than they're helping?
Well, there's all sorts of different antitrust law, so that's a complicated question. But let me just take one example, and that is minimum price requirements. There are laws that prohibit businesses from charging low prices, on the theory that if they charge low prices, they will succeed in the market, drive out their competitors, and then become a monopoly. But there are also laws that prohibit businesses from charging too high prices, because to do so represents an intent to monopolize.
Mm-hmm.
There's also laws that prohibit you from agreeing with other businesses to charge the same rate, because that would be a cartel.
Right, collusion.
So no matter what you do, you are subject to liability under the antitrust laws, and it gets worse. These laws that prohibit low prices, these anti-predatory pricing laws, that's what they call them. What, of course, the government shouldn't be protecting us from low prices.
Right.
Price wars are a great thing that are wonderful for the consumer. And the federal courts have adopted certain rules. In a case called Brook Group, for instance, they adopted a rule that severely restricts when businesses can sue other businesses for charging low prices, and that's a good thing. But unfortunately, these laws have not been adopted. These rules have not been adopted by the courts of a lot of states, and so a lot of state antitrust laws still just prohibit charging low prices. So there's a case, for example, in California if you're a tourist to San Francisco and you want to go out to Alcatraz, there's two ferries that you can take, the red and white and the blue and gold. Well, the red and white, I think it was, they sold tickets at a walk-up window for above the cost of the tickets. But then they sold some tickets to hotels at below the cost of the tickets, and then those were sold to concierge at hotels and things, and then they would sell those to tourists and mark up the price, right? So on average, the tickets came out to being above the cost. There's no difference between these tickets. Nevertheless, the court said, well, no. You see, those are wholesale tickets and those are retail tickets, and the wholesale tickets you charged below cost, and that's illegal. Well, okay, but there's, again, like I said, there's no difference between the tickets. So what you have is, you have a court that divides up a market, arbitrarily says, oh no, we're going to treat these tickets as different from these tickets, and now what you did is illegal. So the antitrust laws allow courts to find a violation of the law based solely on arbitrarily defining the market, right? So another example is when Dreyer's, Nestle tried to buy the Dreyer's ice cream company. It's not a monopoly for Nestle to buy Dreyer's. There's plenty of ice cream companies out there. So what the Federal Trade Commission did was it said, oh no, see, Dreyer's is a special market. That's a super premium ice cream, which I guess means really good ice cream. Right. And now it's a monopoly in the super premium ice cream market. See, it's totally arbitrary. It's just how narrowly the court decides to draw the circle. It finds this behavior is illegal. And the bottom line to all of this is that it harms consumers, because all of this comes out of the pockets of consumers. All these businesses hire lawyers, they have to spend years in court to litigate these cases, and we all pay for that, because businesses ought to be spending that money investing in improving their products, charging lower prices, providing us with better services.
Right, making things more productive and efficient.
Right.
And it's ironic, too, that usually you hear antitrust laws being meant to protect the consumer.
Which is ridiculous.
When in fact it's not.
Yeah.
So I think that's really good for people to understand that difference, because so many, even on the Republican side, tend to argue with me and say that we need more of these laws. And it seems just wrong to me, especially what you've talked about. So would you be willing to share with us, if there's anything off the top of your head, any of the most egregious examples of where the government has tried to stifle or tried to subvert our ability to run the rights alone?
I'm working on a case. I just filed it about a month ago in Missouri. My client is a guy named Michael Muni, and he works for a company called ABC Quality Moving. Well, in Missouri, if you want a license to run a moving business, you first have to get permission from all of the existing moving companies. What happens is you apply for a license, and the state notifies all the existing companies and gives them the chance to object to you getting a new license. And when they object, you then have to go to a bunch of bureaucrats and prove to them that there needs to be a new moving company. Well, how do you do that? You can't prove that there should be a new business. Right. In 1989, if you had tried to open a Starbucks and somebody had said, why does there need to be a new coffee shop? Could you have proven that there needed to be a new coffee shop? Of course not. There's plenty of coffee shops, right? So this law, and unfortunately, as ridiculous as this law is, that requires you to get permission from your own competition before going into business, most major metropolitan areas in the country regulate the taxi cab industry in just this way, and other industries. These are called certificate of necessity requirements, and they're on the books in most states regulating one kind of industry or another. Now, we filed a similar lawsuit in Oregon a couple of years ago, challenging an identical law that required moving companies to get permission from their own competition. And I'm glad to say that when the court refused to dismiss that case, the state legislature decided it wasn't worth it and repealed that law. And that was in October of last year. In the years since then, there have been over 20 new moving companies started in Oregon. In contrast, with the 2 years before we filed that lawsuit, not a single new moving company had been allowed to open.
Right, imagine that. The competition didn't want them.
Exactly.
That is interesting stuff, and I hope that people will take this to heart and think a little bit more about this. We're going to go ahead and wrap up, but I want to thank you again for coming in today, Tim.
Thanks for having me.
I'm definitely going to get a copy. Again, it's The Right to Earn a Living. Now, is there anywhere specific they can go online or bookstores to get it?
PacificLegal.org is our website, and then the book is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and various other places.
All those normal places. Okay, great. Well, thanks again for having us.
Thank you.
Or for joining us today. My name is Amanda Teresi. I'm with Liberty on the Rocks, and thanks again for joining us this afternoon.